particularly like the explanatory comments below the words because they're so salient and pertinent. Bob Lant says, "The reaches a point when survival is no longer possible. This is when we are left with a stump of the story that once was." Terry McDermott says, "We watch and wait, anticipating change. I want action, politicians want votes. Everywhere I go, the mood to change is like a presence." I'm sorry to say Mark Butler is an apology for tonight. The recent reshuffle made it impossible for him to be here or find time to even record a message of goodwill and encouragement, which he's asked me to pass on to you all. I should say this has been a heavy blow for the rank and file of the Labor Party, as Mark was a champion for strong action on climate change. The news was enough to make some people think about laying down and giving up, a terrible outcome that must be resisted, because vacating the field means leaving it to the corporate barbarians and the amoral political serfs to do their bidding. The great Muhammad Ali had a way to mentally prepare for heavy blows. He said, "A heavy blow takes you to the door of the half-dream room. When it opens, time slows down and you see neon lights flashing orange and green, bats blowing trumpets, alligators playing trombones and snakes screaming. On the rack near the door, actors' clothes are hanging, and the task to survive is to slip on the costume and act your way out until your head clears enough to get back in the fight. A good tactic to keep in mind the next time a heavy blow jolts you." Art sits above politics. Its power and poignancy have an ability to catapult issues into the public consciousness like no other medium. With those opening remarks out of the way, I've put some words together that I hope will do justice to the size of the climate challenge, the work and efforts of these wonderful artists, and also provide reasons for hope based on historical precedent. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. That was from A Tale of Two Cities, written in 1859 by Charles Dickens. Dickens was referring to Paris and London during the French Revolution. The revolution was a spring of hope for the mass of people who wanted action and relief from stifling poverty and oppression. However, for those of the ancient regime, the revolution was a winter of despair, which had led to death and destruction. The phrase has great literary value in comparing and contrasting extreme situations. The world is once again in an extreme situation. There are many threats to overcome: nuclear war, militarism, inequality, authoritarianism, and a political system that vomits up ineffectual leaders. All of these issues can be challenged and overcome, but if the threat of climate change is not tackled soon, then these issues become moot. Recently, the actor Sean Connery passed away. In 1979, he made a movie called Meteor, and he played the role of a scientist, Dr. Paul Bradley. He said to a group who had the power to mitigate the impact of the meteor, "I told you what's going to happen when this meteor hits. If you think you can prevent it by burying your heads under a blanket of shit, fine. If you reach a decision, I'll be in a bar across the road." In the film, the name of the meteor was Orpheus. On June 23, 1988, ironically in sweltering heat, Dr. James Hansen gave evidence to the US Senate committee, warning us about the metaphorical meteor called greenhouse effect that had already struck. He said it's time to stop waffling so much and say the evidence is pretty strong that the greenhouse effect is here. Scientists warned us what was going to happen too, when they first expressed concern about the possible climate change and more than a decade before Hansen's testimony. The most publicised report came from the National Academy of Sciences in 1977. It warned that on current trajectories, average temperatures may rise 6 degrees Celsius by 2050 due to the burning of coal. It has been more than 30 years since Hansen gave his evidence, and we're still collectively sitting in the bar across the street, waiting for a decision, while our supine governing class has their heads stuck under the blanket of shit. At the COP21 Paris, it was acknowledged that 2 degrees of warming was too much, and 1.5 was adopted in the text, but it wasn't binding. It was left to nations to individually come up with their own response to meet the meaning of the text. The problem is when you add up all the individual solutions, the warming adds up to about 4 degrees. The following COP22, held in Marrakesh, virtually folded on the news of Trump's victory, together with his coterie of radical climate-denying jihadis known as Republicans. Biden has taken a step of restoring the Paris agreements. However, the scale and dimension of the problem remain, and are nothing like we've ever encountered. While 98% of climate scientists agree climate change is real and happening, there's another group within the 98% who think it's much worse. The icebreaker is so rapid they can't model it, and this group factor into the mix the 100 times more powerful gas methane, which makes the equation much worse. Sobering facts are everywhere. Let's just take one. There's about 5 gigatons of methane currently in the atmosphere, yet buried in the Siberian Arctic shelf are thousands of gigatons of methane, and it's just 1% of that leaks into the atmosphere. We're looking at what they call abrupt climate change. British scientist John Neeson, chairman of the Arctic Methane Emergency Group, suggests that if the summer sea ice loss passes the point of no return, and catastrophic Arctic methane feedbacks kick in, we'll be in an instant planetary emergency. That raises the question, will the species survive? The image that comes to mind is of the proverbial lemmings marching towards the cliff while cheering their intrepid leaders. Julia Gillard, Australia's first female Prime Minister, put a price on carbon, and that was very positive and had immediate effects. This was quickly removed by Australia's first moron as PM, Tony Abbott. Abbott regards climate change as bullshit, and while he's gone, the legacy continues. I recently had a stoush with Craig Kelly MP on Facebook, who is of the opinion that carbon dioxide doesn't cause human health problems. So I invited him to put a plastic bag over his head, tie it tightly around his neck and see what happens next. I haven't. For the first time in history, humans are poised to destroy the prospects of decent existence and much of life. The rate of species destruction right now is on the level 65 million years ago, when a huge asteroid hit the Earth, ended the age of the dinosaurs, and opened the way for the proliferation of mammals. The difference is today, we are the asteroid, and we may be paving the way for beetles and bacteria when we've concluded our work. No literate person can fail to detect that we are facing an era of severe environmental disaster that could become dire if current tendencies are not reversed. To give another example, a few years ago, 2 leading scientific journals published a study on the West Antarctic ice sheet. It's long been understood that if it collapses, it will lead almost inevitably to a rise in global sea level of at least 10 feet within a few generations, and wipes out civilization in any recognisable form. Studies show it is collapsing, and leading scientists warn that further release of greenhouse gases will certainly make the situation worse, destabilising other parts of Antarctica, as well as the Greenland ice sheet, causing many of the world's coastal cities to be abandoned, with horrifying consequence for the poor inhabitants of coastal plains and probably millions in Bangladesh alone, which consequently will make the current refugee crisis look like a picnic. There was some debate some years back between the astrophysicist Carl Sagan and Ernst Mayr, the grand old man of biology. The topic was the possibility of extraterrestrial life, with Sagan saying, from his point of view of an astrophysicist, it's very likely because there are so many planets similar enough to Earth that they could sustain life and evolution to a higher intelligence. Ernst Mayr took the opposite view. Arguing as a biologist, he said we should pay attention to the one example we have, namely Earth. He pointed out that the history of life on Earth, there have been several billion species, some successful, some not. And it turns out that success of a species, in terms of its ability to survive, is inversely related to its intelligence. So the most successful species are those that mutate very quickly, like bacteria, or those of a fixed ecological niche, like beetles. They do very well no matter what happens, and as you move up the scale of what we call intelligence, survival becomes much more hazardous. Mayer also pointed out that the average life expectancy for a species is roughly about 100,000 years. Ominously, that's about how long Homo sapiens have been on Earth. So Mayer's conclusion is intelligence is basically a lethal mutation. As you move up to greater intelligence, there's more and more self-destruction. And a Martian watching us from outer space might observe that we're trying to prove Mayer correct. The survival of the species is an open question. It all depends on what we do, meaning that the great mass of us must enter the political sphere and demand a system that implements policies that the mass of humanity wants. Although we'll let their self-interested victims of the corporate mega-rich, the 0.1% of the population, continue to lead us down a path where environmental and nuclear oblivion is a real and present possibility. On January 26th of each year, Australia Day, the Atomic Bulletin of Scientists updates the doomsday clock. When it started in 1947, it was 7 minutes to midnight. And with the advent of hydrogen bomb testing, it went to 2 minutes to midnight in 1953. On January 26, 2018, the clock returned to 2 minutes to midnight for the second time. This year, as last year, the minutes were abandoned for seconds. And at 100 seconds to midnight, we are the closest we've ever been to catastrophe. So there's plenty to be pessimistic about and plenty to be optimistic about too. For example, there's now a problem about maintaining social security that's been the subject of vicious attacks from the jackbed of austerity, along with free education and free medical care. That wasn't a problem in the 1920s because there was no social security and no medical care. Even in the 1960s there wasn't a problem about defending medical care because there wasn't any to defend. And if you go through it case by case, what you find is a gradual growth in civilisation. And what occurs is a steady change that improves civil norms. It's like a continuing upward recognition of intrinsic human rights that periodically gets beaten down, and then the resistance starts again, but from a higher level. We're at a higher level now than ever before. So where's it going to go next? Who knows? Your guess is as good as anyone else's guess. Nobody's ever been able to predict it in the past, and nobody's able to predict it now. What you can say is, yes, we're back in another familiar period, and it could lead to movements like in the 30s or the 60s, or it could lead to fascism. Nobody knows. Which way it goes depends on what people do. And these are not topics for academic seminars where you sit around and philosophise. It may be fun, but it doesn't make a difference what's decided in those forums, because these are things that have to be answered in the arena of actual life. Through action, participation, organising, and the rest. That's what will determine the answer, and nobody can predict it. I like the quote from Gramsci because it's so germane to our times. He said, "The crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear." So in the interregnum periods, it's important to speak with a loud, clear voice, because when the time comes for the new, people look to the ideas that are already lying around and what's been advocated for. Many of us feel that we're on a threshold of a future worth fighting for, and we can feel the tide of history is on the turn. Many feel that the dark days which have lasted decades are coming to an end, and that we can glimpse the sun beginning to rise. As George Harrison so memorably coined in his fabulous Beatles ballad, "Here comes the sun." And if it finally does come up and fills the place with warmth and light, it won't be because we hope for it. It will be because people decided to enter the arena of actual life and demand things. Because as Frederick Douglass told us on the 3rd of August 1857, power never concedes anything without a demand. It never did, and it never will. And on that note, I'm very pleased to say the exhibition Utopian Twilight, A Conversation for Changing Times, is open. Thank you.